Welcome back to the second part of Public Square. I want to welcome our leadership folks. And I want to start with Sovereign. Did you hear anything among the different solutions we're talking about you think can move the needle for New Mexico?
I think we heard a lot about the importance of education. We really need to fund education at a level that will, and in areas that are linked to outcomes of success for our children. And that means, you know, putting money behind evidence-based programs that show that success rates for children, things like extended school year, tutoring, and then putting money towards at-risk kids. Also, I mean, the importance of people being able to have a basic standard of living. I mean, we've heard how hard it is even for the middle class, you know, in New Mexico. We have a high rate of people in deep poverty. That's living below 50% of the federal poverty rate, or less than $10,000 a year for a family of 3. Making sure that we have a minimum wage that ensures people can make just basic ends meet, let alone accumulate some assets to be able to buy homes. And then also just the importance of making sure our safety net is there to minimize the impact of that poverty. And really, we should look at it as a work support. We've seen programs that are primarily meant to help families work have decreased enrollment, even though more families are eligible, and we need to look at that. Programs like our Child Care Assistance Program, which helps families that are low income have child care so that they can work. That shows a lack of opportunity, I think, for the parents not having access to those kind of resources.
Representative James, we have a poor state. We don't have a lot of resources. We have to make difficult choices on how to prioritize those. So what do you see as the state's role in this?
I think what I found most encouraging about the earlier discussion was that there was mostly a focus on empowering individuals. So for instance, if we can help workers improve their skills or help them to acquire better job opportunities by investing in them directly and getting them additional training, or allowing them to set aside money and to save it for buying a house, starting a business, going to school. Those are the types of things that I think that the state should be investing in. And it really is a...
Are we investing in that now? Or?
We are. Okay. We are. And
clearly not enough if we still have...
It's a continuum, and that's one of the challenges, is that it's a continuum. It's early childhood education, again, going back to making sure that the right programs are being supported. We have evidence that some programs work and other programs don't work. It's making sure that students are actually learning when they're in school. Again, this whole issue of allowing children to go from the 3rd grade to the 4th grade when they're not ready for it, bad idea. Getting students into high school, getting them ready for college so that we don't have to spend as much money on remedial education once they get to the university, and then once they're actually at the university, getting them to actually graduate with actual skills. Looking at issues such as the program of the LICTR program, which is the low-income tax rebate program, is designed to help low-income people by giving them a rebate. It's sort of like the earned income tax credit at the federal level. I think that those approaches are much better than doing things like raising the minimum wage, which is actually where, if you look at that as a tool for reducing poverty, it doesn't work because it's not well targeted. Well, if you can look at the studies. So for instance, only 10% of people, if you raise the minimum wage, only 10% of those people will be on SNAP or Medicaid. So 90% of the people that would be helped with a minimum wage raise would not be on Medicaid, would not be on SNAP. And those are the people that are the most vulnerable.
Talk about what you plan to do to address some of the things we've heard about, or maybe support some of the things we've heard about. Or
well, some of the other things that I've worked on in the past and I'm working on still now is trying to improve the business climate. So one of the challenges I think with our state is that we need to make a conducive environment for entrepreneurs to start businesses or for businesses to move here.
Representative Trujillo, is that going to get us, that kind of stuff going to get us to where we need to be?
I strongly believe that we don't invest enough in public education. I strongly believe that we don't invest enough in training, and I think that we need to really think about how we prioritize our issues, especially in the area of poverty. I come from Taos. I come from a family of 16 kids. 11 of us are alive. We had, jokes that that we tell our mom, like, how do you feed us all? She goes, I just add a little bit more water to the gravy, or, those kinds of things. You just wonder how she managed to feed so many of us. coming to Albuquerque and teaching, I taught at 3 different school sites. And I learned that living in the, in the Dolores Gonzales area and Kit Carson is very different than living in Nob Hill and teaching at Monte Vista. And the only things that were the same were the fact that parents all want the best for their kids. And right now, as a legislator, there are really differences in our approach. My colleague here has, I think he's stating that we throw too much money at certain things, and I'm saying we don't have.
Well, I'm hearing him say that we need to be more cautious about where we put money and how we're strategic.
And just as an example, in 2010, the state roughly spent about $80 to $90 million on early childhood education. It's now over $200 million.
I think that's good that that's happened, but it's not nearly enough. And the same thing is occurring with K-12. It's not enough. The kids that need the help the most aren't getting it.
I have worked in the social work field for 10 years, and I work with the at-risk population, so children who are environmentally at risk. We do have some of that money, the early childhood money, who helps the home visiting program that I manage the contracts for. These parents and children need so much more. My grandmother, she had a 3rd grade education, native New Mexican. Her mother died in childbirth when she was 9 years old. My great-grandfather said, "You're the oldest of the girls, you stay home." She pushed a chair to the counter, and 9-year-old little girl, and she made tortillas and beans for everybody in the home. So she never taught that to my mother and my uncles and aunts. It never went on, so my mother never talked to us about college because they didn't know.
We talked about how do you address this sort of intergenerational kind of thing. Like, how do you get it?
It's a very difficult problem, and it's just like education. It's a multifaceted problem that you have to tackle at different angles. I've heard wonderful things and actually seen wonderful things about the home visitation programs that we have in our state. It's about, again, valuing education, because poverty does not mean that you can't do well in school. It does not mean that you have a path that is always destitute and that you cannot achieve.
I think that's a really positive message, but I'm not sure it's completely realistic. I was a teacher in the public schools in Santa Fe for 5 years. And I worked in a really low-income school, 100% Title I, below the poverty line. And we were telling the kids that we didn't have low expectations for them because they were in poverty, but we had kids who weren't eating, right? And to tell a kid that you're expected to succeed who's not eating, and saying, like, let's not talk about your poverty because you should be able to succeed, ignores the fact that, like, look around the country, it's not just New Mexico. Kids who are living in poverty, kids who aren't eating, kids who are being abused, kids who don't have homes don't succeed in school. And it's not because of their character, right? It's not because their teachers aren't giving them the right message and not having the right expectations. And that's a really unfair thing to put on them.
Not just their teachers, but their parents.
Right, or their parents. Yeah, but maybe their parents don't want the same things. They're hungry.
Because it might be working. My mom had to work 2 jobs. You know, even if the parents are there, because sometimes the adult kids are being the parents. My sister had to be the parent for us. So even if the parent is around, you know, it doesn't necessarily mean they're getting the best at home.
Can I add something into changing the language? The number one thing that convinces a person to start their business is if they see someone in their same situation that jump into the business, because they see that as an inspiration. So when people comes through programs that has not only impact to their life, but to breaking the cycle. So those kids then know that they can do it because they've seen it. So that's the approach that I will say to change the language about, oh yeah, we're in poverty and we can do it. It's okay, we know that. But we also know that we can do it because of those people that already did.
I think that one of the things that's being said really is that we can't solve $100 problems with 10-cent solutions. They have to be integrated. They have to be comprehensive. And an example of that is an initiative that we have started with the Rio Grande Credit Union called Prosperity Kids. So there are 500 children who now have bank accounts. And they are opened with $100, and we match family money up to $200 a year for 10 years. We expect those children to graduate high school with $5,000 to $7,000. Okay?
Nice.
But who are these children? They are the children of parents who have completed 10 weeks of child development training and community leadership training and 2 more weeks of financial capability training. So in addition to that, these are already parents that are clearly committed. It's about opportunity that they have not had previously, and about knowledge, and about relationships. And also they have access to our Immigrant Loan Fund. There are thousands of New Mexicans who are eligible for some level of documentation and don't have the money for filing fees. So now we have that opportunity too. If we can reframe, as you were saying, and say, there are opportunities here. Let's invest in New Mexicans. Let's not look at distant heroes.
Seems to be a mix of supporting what we have here, but also attracting new capital, new people with new ideas to come here. Right now we've got people leaving state, you know, and so I come, there's like this chicken and egg thing, because I think everybody cares about poverty in this state, no matter what their party affiliation or where they are. They have different ideas about how we approach it, and we don't seem to have a dialogue about it. So like, how do you bring these together?
Well, I think the right people have to have the dialogue. And what I'm seeing happening is that you have business owners. I was at an event the other day where economic development people were talking. They were talking to some of us legislators, and they were pushing the idea of bringing different folks into the state and providing the supports necessary for economic development. But I didn't see other folks like the building trades folks or union activists in the conversation, because it seems to be you have to do this or you can't do this, you know, that kind of thing. They wanted right to work, and they don't want to support a minimum wage. Why can't we have conversations with those stakeholders where it's a win-win for everybody? It doesn't happen because I think people are too caught up in their own greed.
Well, it's very dangerous. I think the issue of free enterprise is really the solution. I think that we need to continue to start talking about things that allow for multi-states to get together, come up with solutions. Healthcare is a big issue. We haven't talked about that yet. One of the big issues I have is that the Affordable Care Act is actually disincentivizing health savings accounts, which again is right in line with IDAs. It's right in line with the ABLE accounts that we're trying to start now in New Mexico. It's right in line with some of these other ideas of giving individuals individual accounts that grow over time and then can be used for something.
It's a major risk shift away from the corporations who are making money off of the employers onto the employees. And what we know from 401ks and the like is that people do not have the knowledge to manage that. And the system that we have had of pensions was much more able to take care of our families and our futures. And it's the same thing with HSAs. The idea that
so shouldn't we educate people to help them to
we can educate
better
people,
work
but
on
that's
accounts?
not the point. The point is the risk shift. Why should the public pay for and individual families pay for a shift off of the bottom of the corporate line and onto the public and to the families? It's an absurdity. And it is what, you know, you're saying that we should have a free market and that should work for us.
Right.
Is it working in New Mexico?
Nope.
When we're the poorest state in the
We
nation?
don't have a free market here.
Oh, of course we do.
No, we don't.
And yes, we do.
Well, we don't. We
How
actually
is it
have
that
a
we
lot of
don't?
things that don't make a true free market, but Representative James, I think Robin can tell you, because she and Chris are working in that free market space, but there's a lot of winners and there's a lot of losers in a free market. And I think what people around here seem to be, they tap into a lot of the free market principles. They need tweaks.
It's really important because we're addressing very immediate needs in some of these conversations, but if you really want to think intergenerational and the next generation, we have a saying at SCC, if your mom works in a factory like SCC, you're not going to. You're going to go to college and you're going to have a degree and you're going to make even a better wage, right? You're going to have benefits. Even though we provide benefits, we're looking for our next generation to take a further step. So how are we investing? And I'll just take the lottery scholarship. For an example, we have a 98% high school graduation rate. 86% of our students go on to college. What we're seeing in the last 2 years is really the shift in students who academically are strong enough to go to the University of New Mexico, but are really being pushed into CNM because the first semester their entire tuition is not covered and they do not have enough money and they're afraid, or they don't have access because maybe they're undocumented. They can't take out a loan the first semester, so they're being pigeonholed into CNM, which is a great place to be, but it's an associate's degree, and we have students who can academically make it through a master's. So how are we addressing that issue statewide? That's a state policy that we really need to look at.
Diane, you know, how do we bring people together around common interest of alleviating poverty in New Mexico? You guys all have fabulous ideas.
I've got a crystal ball.
Yes, I'm putting it on you. Well, you all have fabulous ideas, and you're working in things that work. Is it just let's highlight things that work?
Well, I think that people are, when you work with this population of people that are struggling and trying to help families, that there's a myriad of problems and issues that you have to address. And so what I hear here is that everybody clearly says, if I do this, this one thing, please know that's not the answer. You know, I think it's also important in our state that we look to preserve those people who have finally pulled together some assets. You know, you finally got enough money to get a home, and all of a sudden you run into a problem and you're getting ready to lose your home. And I'm so happy the Debt Protection Act just got put back in place on the federal level, because as we work with families and we work with banks to give some debt forgiveness, principal reductions to keep these families in their home, keep them stable, keep them on the tax rolls in New Mexico, and keep them from having to go into the homeless and all the other social services that are out there. That's kind of what a home does. And finally, we've been advocating for a long, long time on the federal level to bring that act back. And so yesterday I read that it's 2015 and 2016. Because if you give a homeowner debt relief, a bank says, I'm going to forgive $50,000 because the interest rate was at 13% at some point, they get a 1099. So they're going to pay taxes at the end of the year? Give me a break. And I just found out that if you have Social Security, and there's a lot of seniors in New Mexico, that you pay taxes on Social Security in New Mexico?
You know, it seems like, again, we all know we have limited resources, but the things we're talking about are sort of these strategic tweaks.
They are. And there are lots of things that can be done to remove barriers and create pathways that don't cost anything. So for instance, we passed a bill in both houses 2 years ago to prevent the use of credit information as a primary screen for employment. The governor vetoed it. That cost anybody anything.
Nothing.
Nothing, right?
But I think businesses probably see that. Tell me if I'm wrong, Robert and Chris, you're in private industry. I mean, businesses are like, why are you telling us what we have to do? We know what's best to run our business.
Correct.
I'm just playing devil's advocate for a minute.
Well, I'm going to put that situation in our industry, in the financial industry. We want to make sure that somebody knows how to handle their own personal credit and they're not in issues before we hire them.
But this is a primary screen. It is not saying that employers, after they have interviewed people and they're going into a place where there is money involved, can't do a financial background check. We're
That's
not saying
the initial screen you're talking about.
It's the initial screen. It's 1,700 people lined up at Target for 900 jobs, and the first 500 are cut off because of a lack of financial history that was.
But that's business policy, as far as when they want to take that consideration in place. For us, it's after they're going through the bondability check and the hiring process.
That's the time.
There's no standardization on when we do it. It's up to the individual companies.
Right, but we're saying that when you do it as a primary screen, what is happening is that that is one of the pillars of poverty. You're not allowing the guy who worked all of his life and in 2008 lost his job, lost his home, lost his car, lost his credit, to even be considered.
But a great worker.
A great worker.
Well, that's the beauty of credit unions right there.
I'll admit I'm torn on that issue. We had this, I wasn't in the legislature at the time that bill was going through, but this last session we had a discussion about convicted felons, the same issue. And I'm torn. I typically side with the business owners in the sense that they should have as much information as possible to make a good determination of an employer, of an employee that they're looking at. But then again, how do we try to give people a second chance? How do we give them the ability to move past some mistakes that they've made in the past and better themselves?
And help them prevent.
I'm torn on that.
And help them prevent that mistake from happening again.
But you know, many people are, and you know what?
Right.
That's to be expected. What we did is dads, as they came out of prison, were looking at the recidivism rate and why dads are going back. We're sending people back into the community, right? And they come out, we give them a job. We have facilitators who said, I want to take a chance on these guys. I want to teach them how to do woodwork. I want to teach them how to do that. They got IDAs. One dad said, I'm going to do my own power washing business, Frankie. He did. He's still doing it. Has not went back to prison. So when we look at that, you know what Mr. James had said was, really, it's kind of torn because if we don't have enough programs, you know, they kind of do go right back. But when we have programs and individuals like ourselves who believe in people and who make these opportunities available, that's when change happens.
I guess I'll turn to Robin for last, because you work in the business sector as well as the public policy sphere. How can we bring more people together who don't talk to each other to talk about this issue that impacts all of us?
I think that we have to have an understanding that the first thing is we're not going to agree. It's not about holding hands and singing Kumbaya. It's finding that place where we can agree on the 10% and move forward on that. And I think it's really key to saying what pieces can we put together despite coming from very diverse backgrounds and thoughts on this.
Well, I thank you all for taking the time to come and talk about this very difficult issue. I really appreciate it. Thanks for coming on Public Square.